In the passage we read this morning from Mark 9, this story and description of the transfiguration of Christ, we see Jesus with Peter and James and John, sort of his inner circle of disciples, up on the side of the mountain. And Peter and James and John are seeing Jesus for who he truly is for the first time. They're seeing their friend, their rabbi, the one that they have devoted their lives to, changed in this miraculous way, and he's shining, and his garments are whiter than any garment could possibly be. And I have to imagine that it's a little bit terrifying to see someone you know suddenly changed like that. And the way that it's described is that Jesus is standing there with Elijah and with Moses. Jesus is standing there within the context of the faith that he and Peter and James and John all practice and were brought up in. Jesus is being shown as part of this holy trio, in a way that the disciples who are there with him can understand what it means. They know the significance of Jesus being there with Elijah and with Moses. And then suddenly, just like at his baptism, there is this voice from heaven that says, "This is my son." So if there was any question about who Jesus is, there is not now. There's this voice from heaven that says, "This is my son, my beloved." And then a command, "Listen to him." And the takeaway for Peter from this experience is that he wants it to stay this way forever. Peter wants to build a shrine or a booth, one for Jesus and one for Elijah and one for Moses, to kind of immortalize this amazing moment that he has just been part of, this revelation that he has just experienced about who Jesus is. And Jesus tells him no. Jesus shuts that down, and they eventually go back down the mountain. I think we've probably all at some point been in a place or thought a little bit like Peter. We have had some religious experience, and we've wanted to keep it that way forever. I remember when I was a youth, I was probably in 8th grade or maybe going into high school, and my youth group in my Methodist church in Atlanta went to Lake Junaluska in North Carolina for a retreat. And that really was the first spiritual retreat that I had been on. And just through this weekend of worship and Bible study and really intense closeness with my friends and being in this beautiful setting and having, a worship time every night around a campfire up on the mountain, I just so powerfully felt the presence of the Holy Spirit with me in that retreat, and I wanted things to be that way forever. A lot of people call that a mountaintop experience, that feeling where you are just so connected to the Spirit of God that you know how real your faith is, you know the truth that is rooted in the gospel, and you just want to stay in that place. You want to do exactly what Peter's trying to do. You want to hold it in place. You want to cement it. You want to build a shrine to it so you can always go back to it, so you can always access that feeling again and remind yourself of the truth and remind yourself of the closeness and presence and intimacy of God with you because you felt it in that moment. But that's not how we actually live. That's not how we actually experience our faith. Just like the disciples had to come back down the mountain with Jesus, we also have to come back down from those mountaintop experiences. We don't get to stay in that altered state of reality, that retreat mindset all of the time. And I think it's because God doesn't fit in the shrines that we are capable of building. Even if we built the most perfect or had the most perfect memory of that experience for ourselves, God is still going to be bigger than whatever we are able to take away from it. Because God is bigger and more mysterious and more paradoxical than we're able to comprehend in any one single moment. And so we need the lifetime of discipleship that we're called to really grow closer to God. God doesn't fit within our ethics or beliefs or our traditions in any one moment. We need the growth. We need the journey. We need the process of coming back down the mountain to really fully experience the wonder of God's presence in our lives. Now, if you were to go to seminary and you were to take a Christian education class, one of the things that you definitely would learn, no matter where you went to seminary, is about James Fowler's stages of faith development. Now, I highly recommend Googling this and reading what you can about them. I'm going to give you a very quick, very brief overview and not do them justice at all, but it's fascinating to think about this and to reflect on your own life and your own spiritual journey in relationship to Fowler's stages of faith development. So the first stage that Fowler talks about is basically the pre-faith experiences of children, where children really are experiencing their faith through the adults in their lives, whether that's parents or grandparents or older siblings or aunts or uncles or Sunday school teachers or neighbors or whoever is part of their community that is bringing them to faith. They really experience faith not on their own, but through the adults in their lives. Then as children get a little bit older, they start to experience faith in stories and in myths. That's why things like godly play are so amazing, because kids can start to interact with these stories that they've been told and find themselves within them. That kids can memorize Bible verses, can memorize Bible stories, and start to understand who God is through that experience of faith, through learning Bible stories and doing all of the fun activities that we do with kids around learning Bible stories. Then, as we get to be teenagers, we go from just having this understanding of faith told to us through stories that we've learned and internalized, but instead we start to develop a sense of ethics based on our faith, and we start to develop a sense of right and wrong and self and other and what I believe and what I don't believe. But it's very binary. It's very inside my box or outside my box. It's very absolute. And that's what we see a lot from teenagers who are really fervent in their faith, but there's a lot of like, this is the thing I believe, and anything outside of that is wrong, and they're able to reject that. I will say here that some Christian traditions privilege that stage of belief over anything that comes after it, and sort of privilege that level of certainty and try to hold people in it. And then when folks normally and naturally start progressing beyond it, there becomes this crisis of faith. Now, we as United Methodists don't privilege that stage of faith development. We want people to take the whole journey. But so after that certainty of our teenage years, when we start to get into our 20s, and our 20s are sort of the earliest that we can possibly really start engaging on our own this level of faith development because of just our cognitive development. But when we get into young adulthood, we start to ask questions of those boxes. We start to realize that there's a lot of gray area in what we believe. And for some people, that questioning process, that deconstructing process is really jarring, and they walk away then. And maybe that's because they've been told that everything has to be this sort of black and white. It has to fit inside the box that they have constructed, and realizing that there's like nuance and gray area is not a thing that they're willing to accept. So a lot of people actually walk away at this point. But if you kind of make it through that stage of questioning and realizing maybe the boxes you built weren't the answer to everything, maybe there's more, that next stage of faith development is really about embracing the paradox and finding joy and finding comfort in the fact that we don't have all the answers, and that there is a lot of gray area, there is a lot of nuance, there are a lot of questions that do not have answers that we possibly can understand. It's a little bit of an embracing the mystery of God. And that usually happens sometime in adulthood. And some people stop there, and that's great. But the final stage that Fowler describes is really where what I believe, my faith that now has embraced this paradox, is turned outward into loving and serving others without fear and without doubt. It allows a person at this stage of faith to go out and to love someone who believes something totally different than them, whose, ethics and lifestyle and social location challenge them, challenge what they believe, but they're still able to love and serve that person or serve with that person. So it's really this sort of entry into an understanding of almost a universalism. I don't want to necessarily use that term in a theological sense, but an understanding of embracing all and embracing others in love, not believing that it's going to somehow tear you down. And so I want us to pay attention to those last two stages. The first one is one of them is living with mystery and paradox, embracing mystery and paradox. And then from there, you devote yourself to loving and serving others. That level of faith development is the opposite of trying to stay exactly where you are. It's the opposite of trying to build a shrine and hold things in place. It's actually a letting go. And that's what the disciples, I think, discover too, because Jesus doesn't let them stay on that mountainside. They start coming down and they're asking Jesus questions, but when they finally get to the bottom, when they get off the mountain and they team back up with the other disciples, the very first thing they do is encounter someone possessed by a demon, and Jesus begins the work of healing that person. When the disciples come down off the mountain from this mind-expanding experience where they are not allowed to hold it in place, where they're not allowed to build it a shrine, Jesus takes them from that into the mess of the real world. He takes them down off the mountain, away from this mountaintop experience, and into the fray for the sake of loving others. And that first situation that they encounter, that demon-possessed child, it seems impossible. This child has been this way, has been possessed with this demon for his entire life. The religious leaders are there. They don't have answers anymore. The boy's parents definitely are out of options. But that's the situation that Jesus leads the disciples into. We're led down the mountains where maybe we want to stay for the same reason. We're led down the mountains of transforming religious experience, of certainty, into the mess and the paradox and the mystery and the seeming impossibility of faith put into action. And when we take that journey, when we come down off the mountain, we start to realize how much more there is to our faith than simply what we believe. I think some of the mess that we're being led into now in our situation is that we live in a world that is infected with conspiracy theories and infected with a virus and infected with injustice and inequality. And it seems especially heavy right now. It seems especially impossible right now. And maybe a lot of us want to go back up the mountain, even if it's just to a year ago, where at least we had some boxes, at least we had some booths, at least we had some shrines that helped us make sense of the world, that helped us understand who we are and who God is in the world, and gave us a little bit of comfort. That's not where Jesus is leading us. Jesus is leading us into the seeming impossibility, into the mess, into the questions, into the doubts, into the paradoxes of our faith. Because that's where we learn to love others without fear and without doubt. Lent is a season of journeying, and it starts next week. Lent is a season where we can leave some things behind as we move into a new direction, as we journey again with Christ to the cross and to the tomb and to the resurrection dawn. And whether we're needing to leave behind habits or struggles, or whether we're needing to leave behind our need for safety and certainty, or a place of resignation, or a place of questioning, what we're being led into is an embrace of the messiness, an embrace of the real world, not the mountaintop. Lent leads us into loving others because we witness the great love of Christ, the great love of neighbor and friend and even our enemy. And so I invite you to join us in the season of Lent this year, in a season where we're going to encounter paradoxes and how we're called to live out our faith. And I hope that I'll see you on Wednesday night at 6:30 for our Ash Wednesday service on Zoom.